I'd just like to ask our panelists to start by briefly introducing themselves, giving a little bit of context on how they came to work on alignment. So David, do you mind starting us off?
Sure, yeah. I'm David, so I'm a professor at Cambridge since 3 years ago. Before that, I was doing grad school at Mila and the University of Montreal. I'll be returning there as faculty member in September. So I've been thinking about X-Risk for over 15 years and doing AI for about 11 years now. It's really one of the things that got me into the field. I guess that's enough about me, maybe. So I think like the topic is sort of like the current issues in AI safety. Okay, so I think like I wanted to do some sort of stage setting essentially. I mean, I think like 20 years ago is when around 20 years ago is when like the modern concerns about AI safety started. 10 years ago is when they sort of hit the machine learning community to some extent, with like Stuart Russell, for instance, starting to talk about this, and Nick Bostrom's book getting the attention of machine learning researchers who were very hostile to the idea at the time. And now, like with ChatGPT, is when it's sort of finally stopped being something that you can say is like some crazy idea that only a few researchers take seriously, or no serious researchers take seriously, or something like that. So yeah, I kind of thought or hoped that when that happened, like last year, we would see a big response from the rest of the world, and in some ways we have, but I'm still like very underwhelmed by what we've seen, I think. And yeah, I don't know, I guess we'll get into more stuff later, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Hi, I'm Victoria Krakovna. I'm a research scientist at DeepMind or I guess now Google DeepMind on the AGI safety and alignment team. So I've been a bit at DeepMind for 7 years now, and yeah, I originally got into AI safety as a grad student when I was a grad student at Harvard, maybe like I guess more than 10 years ago now, and yeah, just was reading about it on Less Wrong, and it seemed like a big deal. And then, I got involved in co-founding the Future of Life Institute, which is, I guess, 10 years old now, so a lot of time has passed. But at the time, we were organizing some conferences to bring together AI safety people and machine learning people who were like very separate communities at that time. So yeah, there was a lot of work to do just to get them to talk to each other. And now, I think things have changed a fair bit. I think with the advent of LLMs, a lot more people in machine learning are taking safety seriously and thinking about it more. But yeah, there's still, I think, a lot more work to do there. Now in the past couple of years, it's been good to see like a lot of AI governance work going on, and I personally have been working on model evaluations for dangerous capabilities, and how we can assess how good a model is at various potentially dangerous capabilities like persuasion, cyber offense, reasoning about itself, and so on, and then have that be an input to AI governance. To how careful we should be when deploying these models, or should we deploy these models. So yeah, right now, the AI safety landscape looks very different from when I got into it, and I think better in various respects, but yeah, there's still a lot of work to do.
Hi, everyone. Robert Trager, AI Governance Initiative at the University of Oxford. So how did I get into it? Well, briefly, back in 2016 was AlphaGo, which affected me a lot, and it affected a friend of mine. At the time, I was a professor of political science at UCLA, and had a totally different research agenda. And it also affected a friend of mine who was in political science called Alan Defoe. And he immediately reoriented his research to work on these issues, and he tried to convince me to do it, but I wasn't convinced. But the reason I wasn't convinced was not because of importance. I just thought that other people had better opportunity and more knowledge and could work on these things. And then in 2019, he convinced me to go over to Oxford and talk to everybody that he was talking to. And I discovered two things. One is that the community was extraordinary and there were lots of wonderful people to talk to, and I had a great time. And the other thing was that I disagreed with many of the things that people were saying to me, particularly about the political world. And once I realized that, people said things to me like, well, we don't have a solution to world peace, so we need a technical solution to the alignment problem, as if one thing followed from the other. And that just made absolutely no sense to me. And I just thought, often we need social solutions to go along with technical solutions, and sometimes one works and sometimes the other works. And so when I sort of found that I disagreed with a lot of folks, that was when I decided to get into the field. What do we work on now? The institute that I direct has 5 areas: frontier AI governance, technical AI governance, which is a place that we're investing a lot in now, and we're going to be training DPhil students in computer science and engineering, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really happy to be here and meet all of you. The other things we do are social impacts, China and AI, and I'm forgetting one, am I not? Maybe I mentioned 5. Anyway, that's what we're doing. Looking forward to discussions. Thanks.
Okay, hi, I'm Gillian Hadfield. Are we telling our origin stories? I sort of got the impression we're telling origins. A lot of people know my origin story here, which is, I did have an origin before working in AI safety and alignment areas. My PhD's in economics, that's joined with a law degree. I've been studying the law and economics of institutions and organizations, market structure, governance structures for many years. From the point of view of why don't we see more innovative approaches to solving the kinds of problems of the modern world and technology. I got into AI safety and alignment through reverse nepotism, which was my son, Dylan Hadfield Manel, was thinking about these things as a grad student with Stuart a number of years ago, and it actually was very much aligned with the types of things I thought about. Our first paper on incomplete contracting and AI alignment, taking those models. I then got invited to all the cool parties, so I got to know everybody. And I've been working almost exclusively on AI issues for the last 6 or 7 years. The types of things that I'm thinking about, and we'll talk about this more on the panel, recognizing that alignment is a problem of systems, not of individual agents, and thinking about how do you build systems that are what I call normatively competent, capable of integrating into normative governance systems. That's where we're working today. I have just made a transition, as Adam mentioned, I've just joined Johns Hopkins, which means I've taught my last law school class, which is kind of interesting and cool after 35 years, where they're starting a new school of government and policy, which will have a big focus on tech policy with a joint appointment in the computer science department. I'm very excited about that. So please do reach out to chat about what's going to be happening there. Thanks.
Can I say a tiny bit more on the origin story? Because I guess I started off thinking I would talk about general stuff, and I missed some of the interesting parts. So just, I guess 15 years ago when I started thinking about X-risk, I thought AI was far off, not going to happen in my lifetime. And I always viewed this as mostly a coordination problem where, we need to solve these collective action problems so that people aren't sort of taking risks with the collective good. And existential risk is, just structurally speaking, very much a collective action problem. So I heard about deep learning in 2012, I think. Yeah, right after the AlexNet thing. And at the time, I really didn't know what I was going to be doing with my life because I was trying to think about angles of attack on this collective action problem. But Jeff Hinton's Coursera course in 2012 updated me that deep learning was going to give us AI probably in a couple decades and in my lifetime instead of in centuries or something. And so I saw a great opportunity to get involved in the field. And I was also very curious because I was thinking about like existential risk, more in the way that I would say a lot of people in like the ethics community now think about it, or maybe people in the broader machine learning community, not as like sudden rogue AI takeover, but as sort of like the incentives in society are all messed up. So we're going to, put narrow AI systems in charge of everything, and they're going to optimize for things like, GDP or something. And it's all just it's going to be very dehumanizing and bad. And maybe eventually we'll all go extinct or something like that. But I'd heard about this sort of rogue AI stuff as well online from Less Wrong, and I found it sort of like, plausible in terms of the way the arguments went, but nobody in the field seemed to be taking it seriously. And so I thought that they had like good reasons for that, or thought that I guess I was like 50-50 about whether they would, to be honest. So I was very curious to see what people in the field thought about this, and was hoping that they would tell me, oh yeah, like here are all the reasons why you don't have to worry about that. And instead it was like, well, we have never thought about this at all, and it seems like silly, so we're not going to think about it. And then, 2013 is when I started my grad studies, so that was right after AlexNet and right when we saw things like DQN and the success of deep learning for translation. And at that point, I was like, okay, we're off to the races. There's this thing called reinforcement learning, which is very much like the scary agent threat model. People are combining it with this deep learning stuff that seems to be able to like do these perceptual tasks and these hard tasks, and like, the whole research community is ignoring and ignorant of the issues here, isn't really thinking seriously about what happens when we succeed. And that's when I kind of like, became, okay, this is my mission now, is like get this community and the world aware of this problem.
Okay. Thank you, David, and all our panelists. So I'm going to ask a couple of opening questions to a panel, but we will also be taking audience questions over Swapcard. So if you go to the event for this panel, there should be a little button in the bottom right corner for Q&A. So you can put your questions in there and then also upvote other people's questions. But to start with, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to share what you view as being the core risks in AI safety. Maybe one of the three risks that I described in the opening talk, or potentially, as I said, I want to have fresh perspectives and debates. If you disagree with that categorization or think there's a fourth risk we should be caring about, then I'd also love to hear that. So anyone who'd like to start answering a question.
I can start. So I mentioned like before I heard about deep learning and was like, oh yeah, we're gonna have AGI in my lifetime. I was more worried about these kind of like slow, gradual, like, just making more decisions like automatically and at scale, and sort of how that might lead to sort of dehumanization, concentrations of power, et cetera, et cetera. I'm still really worried about that stuff. I mean, I think actually recently I'm trending more towards being worried about this kind of issue than like, loss of control, sudden rogue AI kind of scenario, because I think at a technical level, the updates have been like more positive for me recently on alignment. But I think even if we solve all these technical problems, I think like if we perfectly solved alignment, which I don't think that's going to happen, to be clear, I think, that's kind of just very unrealistic in my mind. To be perfect, but even if we take that hypothetical, I think that basically cuts our risk of extinction from AI or something equivalent to extinction maybe in half. So from, maybe like 70 or 80% to like half of that would be my estimation. So I'm really worried about the like both everything between like the sudden extreme fast takeoff classic scenarios that people argued about and that nobody talks about anymore, but I think are still quite plausible, because I think things like recursive self-improvement are certainly something that we could expect future AI systems to be capable of. And that doesn't mean like coming up with a new algorithm and then you need to spend months training another system. That means something more like directly modifying your parameters and seeking, the most useful information and interactions with the world in order to figure out which modifications to make. So I'm worried about everything from that sort of like classic fast takeoff. It's all about like a rogue misaligned AI to like very slow, gradual thing where the systems never really go out of control in the sense of like, it just suddenly does something completely different from what I expected or wanted, but in which humanity does not control the way AI technology is used and deployed in the same way that we're not doing a good job of controlling the use of things like, weapons and greenhouse, things that destroy the environment. All right, so these are collective action problems that I think are like really important anchor points for me and how I think about this problem. I think I've basically said, I forget exactly what the question was, but I'll leave it at that for now, I think.
Sure. Gillian, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I think you said misuse, misalignment, and destabilization, right? Those were the three. And I really would emphasize this third one, and I'm very glad to see it on the list. And I think you could think of that as disruption, destabilization. I think about it as just breaking the way the world works. So the type of work that I think about, this is as an economist, as a legal scholar, sort of a theorist of how human societies evolved and how they continue to evolve. And stability is just absolutely central to human societies. We really don't get anything if we don't have basic stability of expectations about how things are going to work. Disorder is enormously costly and dangerous for people all around the world. And this is my concern about the ways in which AI that has been poorly designed, or we haven't thought about how it's going to roll out. I think about this especially with the huge push towards agentic systems and introducing AI agents in high volume, just sort of dumping them out into our markets, into our social systems, into our political systems. I think, to my mind, that's the real concern about what we might precipitate and how we need to think about design. So the word is a good one, destabilization, right? It's disrupting that stability, which you just should not underestimate. It's pulling the rug out from everything you really take for granted.
Brief response. The three categories, I think it's like sort of decent. I'm glad that the third one is there as well, very much. A lot of times people just talk about accident versus misuse, which is very similar to the misalignment versus misuse. And I hate that distinction because I think it misses most of the real action, which is somewhere between like a pure accident, where it's just like, whoops, nobody could have foreseen that. And like, I am deliberately destroying the world. And I think most of this is more like, if I really thought about it, I might realize that this system might have some really negative externalities, or might even like go rogue and turn into one of these, super powerful systems that nobody can get control over. But I'm not thinking that carefully. I'm just, moving fast and breaking things. I'm trying to make a quick buck. I'm like, or maybe I am thinking about it. And I'm like, gosh, this is risky, but I have to take the risk, because if I don't, my business will fail, or I won't be able to get a job, or like my national defense won't be able to compete with the systems that other countries are building. This is often referred to like as structural risk as well. And I think it is a little bit broader than just destabilizations. That's why I want to respond, because I think, stability is important. I definitely agree. But I think there's also stuff that's wrong with the way the world works right now. And I think another thing that AI could do that could lead to very dystopian or outcomes or extinction is just sort of amplifying current problems that we see with the way that the world works. So things like, inequality and the ability to, use money to sort of manipulate people or control people or exert, coercive power over them. I think the combination of those two effects is already having some bad effects on our society, and could be much worse with AI. And that's just one example.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, Pika?
Yeah. So I think I'm definitely also in the camp of being worried about all of these things. I think, advanced AI will be transformative in a lot of ways that are hard to foresee. So probably will be pretty destabilizing, and also like present various misuse opportunities, some of which we might foresee. And like, for example, these systems already seem to be pretty good at persuasion. At some point we might see systems that are like even better than humans at persuasion, and this could be, potentially misused in various ways, for example, for political or commercial purposes in a way that, could have various far-reaching consequences. And then there might be other ways to misuse the systems that, might not be so easily foreseeable. Of course, as you might expect, I'm worried about misalignment risks, and pretty uncertain whether we're going to have the kind of, faster takeoff that David was talking about with, rogue agents self-improving quickly, or whether it's going to be some kind of, slower improvement process that we somehow lose control of. I think that's also quite plausible, and especially given the kind of risk dynamics that we see in the field these days, like that could make it more difficult to, be really careful with deploying these systems, or kind of slow down if we need to do that. And yeah, that's why I'm so excited to see all the AI governance work in recent years, and hopefully being able to coordinate on kind of norms and standards and evaluations and kind of possibly, undercutting this kind of race dynamics. So yeah, I think, as Gillian was saying, like agentic systems are, going to be a big deal and very impactful. And I think right now, like the risks posed by agents are still kind of not taken as seriously as I think maybe they should be in the machine learning community at large. I think I still often kind of encounter these views where people think that like, oh, these systems are just a tool. They're, they're not agents. They're not going to have goals, or like, they're not conscious. Therefore, they're not going to have goals, and so on. And like, I think that's, as a field, we really need to kind of move beyond this kind of like, simplistic or maybe like anthropomorphic conception of agency, and to be able to kind of evaluate when these systems start to develop like maybe different aspects of goal directedness or intentionality, power seeking, etc., that may or may not overlap with kind of how it manifests in humans. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do there. And right now, I think, thankfully, like one thing I'm excited about with the language model path to general intelligence is that like so far it seems like these systems are not that agentic for how capable they are, which like so far this seems to be pointing towards kind of a slower improvement trajectory, like a slower takeoff, which gives us more opportunity for intervention. And like, people call it slow takeoff. It's kind of slow relative to the kind of instantaneous boom kind of self-improvement thing, but it still kind of would feel very fast by human standards. So yeah, we really kind of need to have our ducks in a row there. But yeah, I think overall I'm worried about all of these things to varying degrees, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to go.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah. So I think sometimes we think a lot about prioritizing risks and prioritizing things, and it can lead to a sort of Hamlet problem where we just spend a lot of time doing that as opposed to realizing that we have a lot of things to worry about. And we should just try to move on a lot of fronts at the same time. So definitely in favor of worrying about all of the things that people have discussed. Maybe I'll just mention two areas that are things that I think about a long time alongside other things. And the first is sort of the sleepwalking problem a little bit, that we kind of sleepwalk into risks because, I think if suppose we had a really bad event, I think, there'd just be tons and tons of people who would say something like, oh yeah, I knew this was a problem. I've been telling people this was a problem for years. But I think in some ways that can amount to, we've been saying that we sort of have a hunch about this problem, rather than a real characterization that crossing some particular line that we can really identify would lead to a problem that we're very confident about, and having enough confidence or a clear enough argument that it can really drive political action. I think that's something that strikes me as just really important and actually a really high bar in terms of driving political action. And I worry that we might not meet that bar, and it's very hard to meet that bar, which is different from saying, it could be a problem and things like that. And maybe, people could say, oh, well, it should be enough to say there's a risk of a certain amount, even if it's a small risk of a really bad thing happening. And that's right. But it maybe is not enough to drive political action. So I think, really focusing on characterizing risks is really an important thing. And second thing I worry about are cases where there are safety performance trade-offs. So, if there's a bright line that can be identified, which is like a cliff, then I actually think we can probably motivate political action around that. And we could do all sorts of things if that were really clear, and nobody wants to walk off a cliff. So that'll help us. And on the other side, if we can actually sort of make systems really totally safe, no matter what people might try to do with them, then of course that would be a good thing too. But we're probably in this intermediate area where, a lot of safety improvements are kind of shifting the schedule of the safety performance trade-off out. And that's going to change how these systems are used in societies. And it's, sort of depends on the way, the shape of that schedule and how we are thinking about risks at a particular point in time, whether shifting the schedule out like that really has a big effect on risks of how they're actually used or not. And so I think we're probably in this world where we will, there won't be sort of these bright lines, where there will be these trade-offs, where there'll be a kind of association between the thing that is potentially beneficial and the thing that is risky. And that's a problematic place to be. And it's a place where technical solutions in and of themselves are often sort of fundamentally can't be the full answer. I mean, unless they sort of have fully removed us from that trade-off, then they're the full answer. But as long as we're still in that trade-off, then I think, we really need sort of governance. And I think it worries me that maybe we're not thinking about the sorts of technological approaches that would help with that governance problem, as opposed to kind of shifting the safety performance trade-off outward.
Thank you, Robert. Just to try to keep schedule, I'll move on to the next question. So one thing I want to pose to the panel is, when you look at the range of topics being pursued in AI safety, which area would you say is most underrated, you'd like to see more people working on? And conversely, which area is most overrated and you think people are more excited by, even as perhaps justified? It doesn't mean that overrated area is a bad place for people to work on, just that at the margin, you'd like to see fewer people working on it.
Yeah, I'll say something really quickly about the safety performance trade-offs first, which is I think these are fundamental. I don't think they're going away. And so I think Robert's absolutely right about this. The one reason why I think they're fundamental, I'll say two reasons that I think are really important to have in mind. One is the issue of assurance, or like having justified confidence in what your system's going to do. So I think, safety you can think about as like the actual reality of, will this system, destroy the world, let's say, if I turn it on, just to simplify things. But there's also this question of like, do I know if this system will destroy the world when I switch it on? And right now, we do not have any idea how to answer that question with high confidence. So there's always going to be more testing that you can do, more, looking at the model and trying to interpret it and understand it, more theory, all this stuff. And so there's just no limit to how much you can invest in improving the assurance, improving your confidence that this system is in fact safe. And so the question is, what's a reasonable investment there? And I think the answer is like quite a bit. In fact, like probably we would like some fundamental advances in terms of our basic techniques for doing assurance with AI systems before we deploy anything that seems like it might be dangerous. Like even GPT-4, frankly, I think that was, that we're at the level already now where like we should not be doing what we're doing. We should stop. The question about research. Traditionally I would have said I think mech interp is overrated because there's so many people doing it and it's so hot and everything. We had a really similar question at this summer school I was at yesterday. And I was like, well, I think I can't say that anymore because Jan Leica had a very similar view to me of not being optimistic about it, but I think he's become more optimistic. So, and I haven't kept up that well with recent developments in the field. But yeah, so I'll have a meta level answer to this question. I think basically within the field of AI safety, there's a reasonable allocation, actually, I think, of talent. Usually, it's there's this portfolio approach that Vika wrote about that I think is the makes a lot of sense to me because we don't really know how things work. So this is just invest broadly, try lots of things, encourage people to pursue any plausible idea that could help. With two exceptions, and again, I'm talking sort of about the AI safety community specifically, not the broader investment. One is I think there's there's like some sort of trend cycles, and so things like mech-interp get hot, and then especially a bunch of like there's a lot of young people and new people entering into this field, and a lot of them latch on to whatever is like the hot trendy thing, and then those trends last like a couple years and something else, and so on and so forth. So there's that, and then there's also just a huge bias towards technical machine learning research, specifically like deep learning and LLM research these days. And it's really good that there is a lot of work on that, but there's so many other angles of attack on this problem, and so many other kinds of like expertise and background and skills and networks that people can bring to bear. And I think that's the main thing. Is I know I'm talking to like technical researchers here, but I just think like we should be doing all sorts of other approaches here. We need like journalists, we need researchers from other fields, we need people who work in government and understand how the government works, we need engagement with civil society. We need this really broad-based response, I think, and that's something that people in the AI safety community I think have neglected for a long time, and I think that's partially because of arguments and ideas or ideologies, but I think it's also partially just because the people who have been drawn to this problem and who care about it and understand it overwhelmingly are like mathematicians and computer scientists, physicists, like that sort of population. So it's actually really interesting. For a while, I think there was this idea that you needed to be like some sort of math or STEM super genius to do anything to contribute to AI safety. I always thought this was totally wrong. Yesterday at the event I was at, I was saying this sort of stuff, and somebody came up to me afterwards. They were like, "But I have a technical background. I feel like I can't do anything now because you've just convinced me that governance is the only thing that matters." So it turns out that no matter what your background is, you might feel like you can't do anything, and the problems that really matter are the things that you don't have the background for. So yeah. I think, even broader, swath of things we should be working on here is the main thing.
Thank you, David. Victoria?
So, yeah, I think one thing I would generally like to see more of is kind of more concrete threat models for, I guess, both misalignment and the other areas that Adam mentioned. And also kind of more concrete examples of misalignment, or examples that where AI systems are misbehaving in various ways, or like things are going wrong, and then like how we might kind of concretely draw conclusions from that. Because often like the kind of threat models we've had in the field are sometimes kind of a bit more high level, and I think especially for governance work and for setting out things like responsible scaling policies, or generally kind of making plans for like what do we need to see to judge that like maybe we're too close to dangerous systems. We need kind of more concrete sort of red lines or stopping points for like if we see this such and such behavior or such and such example, or this kind of property of the system manifested in this way, like actually developing those kinds of those kinds of examples, those kinds of red lines is going to be helpful. So yeah, that's also of course something that we are working on, trying to figure out in my team. But I think more work on this as a whole is going to be helpful. And I guess in terms of things that are, I guess I wouldn't really say overrated. I'm not sure I can judge that. But yeah, I guess right now, like lots of people, like more and more people are working on evaluations in different ways. And maybe, it's possible you could say a similar thing to what you said about mech-interp, that it's a popular area that people are getting into by default. I'm not sure whether it's overrated though, because I think having lots of evaluations is good, and it's just it seems like a very parallelizable area of research where if people just build lots of different evaluations, then we have a diversity of evaluations, and that's generally useful, and then we can always kind of pick the best ones and implement them everywhere. So I think that's something that is probably still good to see more work on. But yeah, overall kind of concrete examples, concrete threat models is something that I would really like to see.
Robert?
Well, far be it from me to say, everybody should or shouldn't work on particular thing. And to be honest, I'm a social scientist. I'm not a technical researcher. I'm so glad to be here and learning from you all about what you are working on, so I can really model the space of what's being done and what's not being done better. So sort of impressionistically, I'll just mention two things. One is I worry a little bit that it seems like people often are, we're sinking resources into kind of first best solutions, which obviously we like the first best solution, so we should be sinking resources into them. But I worry a little bit that they may not be possible, and maybe we're not investing enough in sort of second best solutions. So, kind of an analogy to the social choice space, where under some conditions which often seem reasonable descriptions of the social world, we have various impossibility results where we know we can't have a first best solution. And there is no way of aggregating social preferences that will do all the things that we would want it to do in that context. And so instead of doing that, we need to kind of think about, well, what's the messy world that we are in? What are the configurations of preferences that we're likely to see? And what would be the best solutions in those cases, which is really a kind of very different research program than looking for first best solutions. So that's one thing I worry about a little bit. And then sort of maybe related, the second thing is related to my earlier comment. I think it's plausible. I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but I think it's plausible that the marginal value of technical work on some governance parameters, as opposed to on some of the things that people in this community have more traditionally worked on, is higher. Again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying in some worlds that would be true. And similar to what David was saying, I think there are all these other problems that are that it seems like, given the sort of threat model that some people have, would be really essential to work on, actually. So one of the things that you hear people worry about all the time, I think most of us worry about the idea of kind of technological racing and competition and not having enough time to make things safe in a variety of dimensions. So if that's your primary concern and you don't think there's enough time, what are the things that we should be working on from a technical perspective there? So I think my first choice would probably be thinking about verification. So if we wanted something where countries were actually going to get together and agree not to race in certain ways and to limit themselves in certain ways, then they'd really need to know that they were all being limited in a similar way and that no other actor could come in and kind of scoop things. So you'd need verification of an agreement, but verification isn't the kind of thing that you just, it doesn't make sense. Verification of what? So we can only talk about verification in the context of some social agreement that we would come to, and then you need to verify that everybody is adhering to that thing, either a formal agreement or some kind of informal understanding or norm. So that strikes me as an area where I don't really see that much work happening, but given the threat models that I hear, seems like it would be a really critical place for work to happen. I'll just mention one other area that also strikes me in that way. So one kind of ecosystem that we can imagine that I think, particularly when it comes to civilian governance internationally, could be effective is sort of similar to finance, where we have compute providers as intermediaries. And we all have the experience of not being able to use a credit card and being denied financial resources because we've raised some red flags, and it may be that compute providers will be in a similar position, denying computing resources when red flags have been raised. But that then suggests a whole set of technical problems for people to be working on. What can a compute provider learn about what's being done with its systems from the signals that it's getting now? What could it learn if it was working with customers in some way and there was something in a user agreement that suggested that customers had to provide certain information, and so on and so on. And so that's a huge range of technical problems that we started a project on at Oxford with a couple of graduate students. But we're just, and I should say there are a couple of papers in this area, but clearly there's so much more to do. So depending on what your threat models are, some of these other sort of, if we could say, less traditional projects seem like they could be very valuable.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, Gillian, you're going to get the final words since we need to wrap up after this. So.
All right. Okay. So I would, echoing Robert, I wouldn't want to say anybody who's doing work now shouldn't continue doing that work. The problem is we don't have enough work generally. I do think that the share of attention is not right. So I just like to grow other things rather than shrink anything that we're doing. But I do think that we're fundamentally missing really, really important lines of research. I think we need to be talking a lot more about how multi-agent systems work. I think we are way over-focused. Again, keep doing all this work, but as a proportion, way over-focused on the single system, the single agent, alignment, the idea of aligning with preferences. All of these things are really not taking seriously that economic, legal, normative, social order is a complex, adaptive system. And you have to study it at the level of the system. We can't just say, let's evaluate this model and see how it behaves. We have to know, how is the system going to respond when we have multiple entities interacting in a different way? And so I mentioned my background is in economics, and I think it's actually a really important framework to bring, because economists do not say, let's align individuals, right? They say, okay, let's assume they're all exclusively self-interested. Under what kinds of organizational structures does the interaction of those self-interested agents lead to an outcome that's better for society? We have a theory about perfect markets on that, which actually already has a lot of institutional structure in it, because you can't have markets without property systems and contracting systems and rules against just taking whatever you want or beating somebody up to get what you want. So there's lots of legal structure already embedded in the idea of a market. And then, of course, we have our markets are not perfect. Our democracies are not perfect, political institutions. So we have a lot of work about what kinds of interventions will shift the behavior of the system. And we're not focused on just changing those individual agents. We're focused on changing the behavior of systems. So I think this is the thing I see that's missing in a big way. The second is, from a technical point of view of what we build, again, it's the idea that we're going to take everything we want and stick it into the system. I actually just want to disagree a little with one of the things that David said earlier, because I think we should do this. The world is broken in lots of ways. There's lots of things about the world that we don't like, but we can't say that solving the problem of figuring out how AI is going to change the world and the way in which it's going to be safe to have it integrated in transformative ways is that we're going to solve all that. We're going to fix the world. We're going to fix politics. We're going to fix economics. We're going to fix inequality and stick that into the model. That's just not the way it's going to play out. What you need to do is build systems that are governable so that we have the capacity for all of the structures we have, the kind of things that Robert's talking about, sort of in politics and legal structure, that then comes in and says, oh, system, you need to behave differently. But we're not building the handholds. We're not building the technical side that you would hook into, right? How does a model call a lawyer and get advice about what's allowable and not allowable? Well, I think that's a technical problem. We could be thinking about how to build that into models, how to build that into systems, and how to build the AI-specific institutions and structures that would provide that guidance. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Gillian. Well, that's all we have time for, so please do join me in thanking our panelists.